The stars in the night sky had always been a reminder of how small humanity was. A constant presence above Earth that had little care for the struggles of the creatures below. For eons, the vast stretches of space had remained indifferent to the lives that played out across countless worlds. Civilizations rose and fell, galaxies lived and died, and the universe continued on its unbothered way. Humanity, a species that had only recently crawled out of the muck of its primitive beginnings, was just another blip in the grand scheme of things. But humanity was not a species to remain unnoticed for long. It started quietly, as many things do, just another handful of humans staring into the cosmos, dreaming of distant stars, their minds far beyond their reality. Earth was nothing more than a speck in the universe, and humanity was a young species that had barely scratched the surface of its potential. They had invented fire and wheel, they had built cities and ships, but when they gazed at the sky, they knew that there was something out there waiting for them. They had learned to survive against the odds through wars, famine, and plague, but they had never truly realized what that would mean when the universe noticed them. The first aliens arrived not with grand announcements or explosions of color, but as quiet visitors, their ships gliding through Earth's atmosphere like shadows. They were the Tazar, an ancient race that had long mastered the art of energy manipulation. The Tazar had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, and they had no need for violence or war. They were beings of logic, calm and collected, whose only goal was the preservation of peace. The universe, in their eyes, was a delicate balance, one that required understanding and cooperation to maintain. The Sur had been watching Earth for some time, marveling at humanity's rapid progress. They believed it was time to make contact, to offer humanity the chance to join the greater galactic community. They approached Earth not as conquerors, but as saviors, offering technology that could heal the sick, provide infinite energy, and take humanity to the stars. The message they brought was clear: join us, and you will be part of something far greater than yourselves. For humanity, it was a dream come true. The moment that Sur appeared, the world stood still. Governments fell in line, their leaders looking on in awe at the possibility of spacefaring travel, of advanced medicine, of limitless energy. But what the Tazar didn't realize was that humanity was not content to merely receive these gifts. They weren't interested in simply existing in harmony with other species. Humans, for all their intelligence and creativity, were driven by something deeper, a hunger to explore, to expand, and to control. The Tsur thought humanity would be grateful for the gifts they offered, but instead, they handed over the keys to the universe. And humanity didn't just step inside, they began to rearrange everything, to make the keys their own. The humans dissected the Tazar's technology, not out of malice, but out of curiosity and ambition. They reverse-engineered the devices given to them, improving upon them, enhancing them. What had once been a shining example of advanced technology became the foundation for humanity's rapid rise. The Tsur had hoped to guide humanity into the fold of galactic peace. But what they had done was give them the tools to disrupt the very order they had worked for eons to maintain. Within months, humanity had taken the Tsur's ships and made them faster, more powerful. They had taken the energy manipulation systems and learned to harness them in ways the Tazar had never intended. The result was a new breed of human species that was no longer content to be a minor player in the galactic stage. Humanity now had the means to challenge the established powers. When the Tazar realized what humanity had done, they panicked. They could feel the tides of change, the growing power of this young species. They tried to maintain control, to put a leash on the humans, and prevent them from continuing their advances. They made demands: cease all technological research, return to your rightful place in the galaxy, or face the consequences. But the humans would not be cowed. There was no fear in humanity's response. There was no hesitation. They did not back down, did not plead for mercy. Instead, they did what they had always done best. They adapted. They adapted so quickly that it left the Tizzer scrambling to comprehend what was happening. Humanity had not only learned from their technology, but they had surpassed it. They had crafted new strategies, new methods of warfare that the Tizzer had never seen. The Tizzer, in their overconfidence, had underestimated the one thing they could not measure, the human spirit. The first strike came with surgical precision. The humans did not attack with overwhelming force, but with intelligence and cunning. They launched their assault where the Tizzer were weakest, not with bombs, but with their own technology, turned against them. Their ships, once sleek and elegant, were now taken and turned into instruments of war. The Tizzer systems, which they had believed impervious, were hacked and corrupted. Their energy manipulation was disrupted by human ingenuity. The Tizzer never saw it coming. The battle that followed was not one of mass destruction at first, but one of intelligence. The Tizzer sent their most advanced fleets to Earth, expecting an easy victory. What they got instead was an enemy they could not comprehend. The Tizzer's fleets were cut to pieces, their technology turned against them. Humanity fought back not with sheer force, but with a ruthless efficiency. They did not waste time with politics or negotiation. They were done with diplomacy. They had tasted power, and they would not be denied. The Sir were soon overwhelmed. The very technologies they had once thought would elevate humanity had become the weapons of their destruction. The Tizzer, in their arrogance, had believed that their wisdom would guide humanity into submission. But they had overlooked one fundamental truth. Humans, when pushed to the edge, would not bend. They would break the universe itself in their quest for survival. It wasn't long before the TSA realized that they had made a fatal mistake. The technology they had given humanity was now used to hunt them down, to track them across the galaxy. The Tizzer, who had once seen themselves as the rulers of the stars, were now the prey. Their empire, once vast and powerful, was slowly and methodically torn apart by the humans they had tried to control. The Sewer made their final retreat to their homeworld, hoping to regroup, to make a last stand. But humanity was relentless. They followed, they hunted, they destroyed. The Sir, once the most powerful species in the galaxy, were wiped out, erased from existence by the very species they had thought would be grateful for their gifts. And as the last Sir fleet was destroyed, as their homeworld burned to the ground, humanity stood victorious. They had proven that no species, no matter how ancient or powerful, was beyond their reach. The galaxy, once an unfathomable expanse of stars, now lay at their feet. But even as humanity celebrated its triumph, there was a growing sense of unease. The Sir had not been the last empire to fall. They had been the first. And now, the galaxy was wide open to those who were willing to take it. Humanity, for all its brilliance, had become a force of destruction. And as they expanded further into the stars, they began to encounter other civilizations, other species that had once ruled their corners of the galaxy. One by one, they would learn the same lesson that Sewer had. Humanity was not to be underestimated, and what had started as a humble species, barely able to leave its home planet, had become the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever known. The universe had made a mistake in underestimating humanity, and now, humanity was about to make a far greater mistake of its own. The Tizzer were gone, erased from the fabric of the galaxy. Their once powerful fleets reduced to debris scattered across the vastness of space. Their homeworld, a jewel of ancient wisdom and technological marvel, now lay in ruins. In their wake, humanity stood victorious, bloodied but unbowed. They had struck down the Tizzer, but in doing so, they had awakened something else of force, far older and far more dangerous than any species they had ever encountered. The immediate aftermath was one of unchecked triumph. For the first time in history, humanity was the dominant power in the galaxy. The Tizzer, in their arrogance, had believed that their advanced technology and peace-loving ways would guide humanity to a better future, but they had miscalculated. Humanity had not simply accepted the gifts they were given, they had them, mastered them, and used them to bring down the mightiest empire the galaxy had ever known. The victory felt sweet, intoxicating even. For centuries, humans had fought against overwhelming odds, against nature, against each other, always clawing their way to the top, always striving for more. But now, they had reached the stars, and they had proven their worth. The message was clear. Humanity was not a species to be ignored, and anyone who dared to cross them would face the full force of their wrath in the wake of the Sur's destruction. Other civilizations began to take notice. Some were filled with awe at humanity's resilience and ingenuity. They marveled at how a species so young, so seemingly insignificant in the grand scope of the galaxy, had managed to topple a race as ancient and powerful as the Sur. But others, older and wiser, were filled with fear. They saw the writing on the wall. Humanity was not content to remain a peaceful observer. They were conquerors at heart, and their hunger for dominance would not be satisfied with just one victory. The first to test humanity's resolve were the Drukhari, a proud and ancient species of warriors who had long ruled over a vast empire. The Drukhari were known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless military tactics and their unyielding strength. They were a race built for war, bred to dominate, and they had never faced a true challenge to their reign until now. When the ships arrived on Earth's doorstep, they came with all the arrogance of a race that had never known defeat. Their massive warships, dark and menacing, glided through space with the assurance of a species that had ruled the stars for millennia. They did not come to negotiate. They came to show humanity its place, to remind them that they were nothing more than a blip in the galaxy's history. The Drukhari expected resistance, but they did not expect what they found. Humanity was not a species that would cower in the face of a challenge. They had learned from the Sur's defeat. They knew how to fight, how to adapt, how to turn even the most advanced enemy into a stepping stone toward greater power. The Drukhari arrived with their weapons primed, ready to enforce their dominance. But humanity's response was swift and brutal. The first battle was not a long one. It was a massacre, a slaughter the Drukhari could never have anticipated. The humans, using Zur technology combined with their own innovations, fought with a savage precision that left the Drukhari reeling. Their ships, once the epitome of power, were torn apart by human ingenuity. The Drukhari's military might, their centuries of experience, counted for nothing in the face of humanity's relentless creativity and adaptability. Humanity fought like it always had, not with brute force, alone, but with cunning and innovation. They hacked into the Drukhari's advanced systems, turning their weapons against them, exploiting every weakness in their ship's design. The humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to dominate. The Drukhari, who had once been a symbol of terror across the galaxy, were now the hunted. Within days, their entire fleet was decimated, their forces scattered to the wind. Their once great empire lay in ruins, another victim of humanity's unstoppable march. The message was clear: humanity had no equals. The Drukhari, like the before them, had been too blinded by their own arrogance to see the true power of humanity. The universe had made a mistake, and now humanity was cleaning up the mess. There was no room for weakness, no tolerance for those who would stand in their way. But even as humanity celebrated their victory over the Drukhari, there was a growing unease. Humanity's rise was too fast, too furious, and it wasn't long before the rest of the galaxy began to take notice. The once peaceful corners of the universe now watched in terror as the humans continued their conquest, sweeping through star systems with a brutal efficiency that left entire races in their wake. The Sur had been the first to underestimate humanity, and they had paid the price. The Drukhari were the second, who would be the third. But it was not just other species that watched with growing concern. An ancient presence older than any of the civilizations humanity had encountered was beginning to stir. The very fabric of the galaxy, long held together by unseen forces, was beginning to unravel. The consequences of humanity's rise were not yet fully understood, but those who had watched the stars for eons knew that this was just the beginning. Humanity's unchecked rise was not just a threat to the other species of the galaxy, it was a threat to the very balance of the universe itself. And now, something was awakening, something that had been lying dormant for millennia, waiting for the moment when the galaxy would be thrown into chaos. The cost of humanity's victory had not yet been fully realized, but it was coming, and when it did, it would change the galaxy forever. The galaxy was vast, so vast that even the most powerful of species could not fully comprehend the sheer expanse of it. There were billions of stars, each surrounded by countless planets, each home to its own secrets. Empires rose and fell in the shadows of that vastness, their fleeting lives marked only by the whispers of history and the stars above. But now, one name began to echo louder than the others: humanity. A species that had barely made it past the age of fire was now at the heart of the galaxy's most unsettling shift. After the swift and brutal destruction of the Drakari, humanity's confidence was at an all-time high. The universe, once a place of uncertainty, was now their playground, and no one dared challenge them. Every species, whether friend or foe, now saw humanity as a force of nature. But with each victory came a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the other galactic powers who had begun to fear humanity, it was something older, something far more ancient. The ancient race known as the Oracles had lived in the dark corners of the universe for millennia, watching, waiting. They had seen the rise and fall of civilizations far beyond anything humanity could imagine. They had seen the destruction wrought by those who had once believed themselves invincible. The Oracles had spent countless eons maintaining the balance of the universe, guiding the stars and their civilizations, ensuring that no one species ever grew too powerful. But when humanity had destroyed the Zerg, something changed. The Oracles had known that humanity was different, that they were not a species that could be easily contained. The Teaser had been a peaceful race, incapable of understanding the drive that burned within humanity. The Oracles, in their ancient wisdom, had seen that fire. They had understood that humanity would rise, and they would not stop until they had reached the stars. They had hoped to let the Sur guide humanity, to offer them the tools to reach their potential. But when the Sur had fallen, it became clear to the Oracles that their hopes had been in vain. Humanity was not just a species among others, it was a force that could no longer be ignored. The Oracles began to move in the shadows, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. They sent their emissaries to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, warning the surviving species of humanity's rise. The message was simple: stop them now, or the universe will be consumed. But the other species were divided. Some were still reeling from the shock of humanity's triumphs over the Su and the Drakari. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and fight back. Others, however, saw the danger humanity posed as the galaxy's new superpower. They could no longer afford to wait. If humanity was allowed to continue its unchecked conquest, the entire universe would fall under their control. In the wake of the Drakari's defeat, humanity began to expand even faster, establishing colonies on distant planets, claiming star systems that were once the domain of the galaxy's oldest empires. With their advanced technology and their insatiable drive, they soon spread beyond what the Teaser and the Drakari had ever dared. And with each new world they took, they only grew stronger, pushing deeper into the galaxy's unknown frontiers. But it wasn't just the Oracles who took notice. The other galactic powers, once content to sit in their fortified strongholds, began to mobilize. The fear that humanity had sown was beginning to spread, and the realization that their survival might be at stake pushed them into action. It was at this moment that the first true alliance of galactic powers was formed. The remaining factions, the Shorians, an ancient race of telepathic beings, the Karak, a brutal insectoid empire, and the Vilori, a race of powerful psionics, joined forces with the last remnants of the Drakari military. Together, they began to form a coalition, one united under a single goal: to stop humanity's expansion. Humanity had no idea what was coming. They had been focused on their rapid conquest, pushing forward with all the ferocity they had learned from their battles with the Sewer and the Drakari. They had encountered resistance, yes, but it had always been weak. The power of their technology, combined with their relentless determination, had carried them through every challenge. But the coalition that was forming was unlike any adversary they had faced before. The Shorians, with their telepathic abilities, were able to form strategies in an instant. Their minds linked in a collective consciousness that made them far more dangerous than any individual could ever be. The Karak, though primitive in comparison, were warriors at heart, their hive mind pushing them to fight with a ferocity that rivaled humanity's own, and the Velori, with their psionic powers, had the ability to warp reality itself, creating powerful shields and devastating attacks. Together, they represented a formidable force, one that humanity could not easily overcome. The first true clash came at the edge of the Drakari's former empire, a planet that had once belonged to the Drakari, rich with resources and strategic importance, had been claimed by humanity. They had built a massive colony there, transforming the planet into a hub for their ever-growing military forces. The coalition knew that if they allowed humanity to retain control over the system, it would serve as a foothold for their further expansion. The battle that ensued was unlike any that had come before. The coalition's fleets descended on the human outpost with terrifying speed. Thousands of ships each, armed to the teeth with weapons humanity had never encountered, poured into the system. The humans, caught off guard by the scale of the attack, scrambled to defend their new territory. But even as they fought back with all the technology and power they had, they soon realized that this was not a battle they could win with technology alone. The coalition's combined forces were overwhelming, their strategies sophisticated and precise. For the first time, humanity was on the defensive. Their fleets, once invincible, were outnumbered and outmatched. The advanced weapons and tactics that had allowed them to conquer the Teaser and the Drakari now seemed inadequate. The battle was long and brutal, with humanity throwing everything they had at the incoming waves of coalition ships. But for all their tenacity, they were slowly losing ground. It was during the final stages of the battle that humanity's true test came. In the midst of the chaos, a lone human vessel, a ship designed for reconnaissance and espionage, slipped past the coalition's defenses. Its mission was simple: infiltrate the heart of the coalition's fleet, disrupt their communications, and provide a chance for humanity to turn the tide. The crew of the ship, brave men and women, armed with nothing but their wits and a few weapons, managed to slip unnoticed into the coalition flagship, a massive vessel that controlled the entire battle. The plan was risky, the odds were slim, but it was humanity's only chance. They succeeded. The communications were severed, and the coalition's coordination faltered. Their ships began to move without direction. Their forces clashed with each other. The disruption allowed humanity's remaining forces to regroup and retaliate. What followed was a brutal counterattack, one that saw the coalition's forces retreating in disarray. But even in victory, there was something unnerving about the battle. Humanity had won, but they had learned a difficult lesson. They were not invincible. There were forces in the galaxy far beyond their understanding, and now they had made their enemies take notice. The galaxy was no longer just a playground, it was a battleground. Humanity had tasted power, but they now knew that every empire, no matter how strong, had its limits. The real question was no longer whether humanity could conquer the stars, it was whether they could survive the consequences of their own ambition. and the answer to that question was far from certain. The battle at the edge of the Drakari Empire had been a wake-up call for humanity. They had emerged victorious, yes, but it was a hard-won victory, and the cost had been higher than they had ever anticipated. For the first time, humanity understood that their dominance was not guaranteed. The galaxy was not a blank canvas waiting to be painted with their conquest. There were forces out there, far more ancient, far more powerful than anything they had ever faced. The coalition of galactic powers, the Shorians, Karak and Valori, had been the first to unite against humanity, but they would not be the last. Humanity had crossed a line. They had pushed forward with such relentless aggression that it had forced the galaxy's other civilizations to reconsider their own survival. The question that now loomed over humanity was no longer whether they could conquer the stars, but whether they could survive the backlash that was coming. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving coalition forces retreated into the depths of the galaxy, licking their wounds and regrouping. The Valori, with their psionic abilities, had felt the weight of the human resolve and insatiable drive that they could not ignore. The Shorians, their collective consciousness disrupted by humanity's unexpected brilliance in war, now feared the consequences of underestimating them. The Karak, ever brutal and direct, had been thrown into disarray by humanity's tactics. What had been a sure thing, a battle they had expected to win, had ended in retreat, and that retreat, for them, was not just a military loss, it was a symbolic defeat that would resonate throughout the galaxy. Back on Earth, humanity celebrated their victory, but the joy was tempered by the heavy realization that their actions had consequences. Their fleet had won the battle, but it had come at a cost: a fractured galaxy, an emboldened enemy, and a galaxy-wide resentment that could no longer be ignored. While the victory had proven humanity's strength, it had also begun to sow the seeds of what might be their downfall. As humanity expanded into more star systems, they began to encounter new forces, new civilizations that, while not as immediately hostile as the coalition, were nonetheless cautious. The galaxy was beginning to close in around them, not with violence, but with suspicion and fear. Many civilizations, once content to remain neutral, now found themselves either forced to ally with humanity or fight against them. The cracks in the once unified galactic peace were starting to show. It wasn't just war that awaited humanity, it was an entire galaxy pushing back against them. That Sur had been an anomaly, the Drakari, a fleeting inconvenience. But now, humanity was starting to see what true resistance looked like. The oracles, those ancient beings who had guided the stars for eons, had watched humanity's rise with increasing concern. They had long acted as stewards of the balance of the galaxy, ensuring that no one species ever dominated to the point of threatening the entire cosmic order. And now, they saw that humanity, in its relentless drive, was pushing the universe to the edge of collapse. The oracles had never interfered in the wars of lesser species. They had always watched and guided from the shadows. But the events of the past few centuries had forced them into action. They had not intervened when humanity took down the Sur. They had not interfered when humanity destroyed the Drakari. But now, with the galaxy in turmoil, the oracles knew that it was time to act. A meeting was called between the galaxy's most ancient and powerful races. The oracles, though cryptic and elusive, summoned the representatives of the Shorians, the Karak, and the Valori, as well as the remnants of the Surthos who had managed to survive the humans' onslaught. It was not a council of peace, but a council of war. The time for diplomacy was over. They needed to find a way to stop humanity, and they needed to do it before it was too late. The oracles knew that humanity could not be defeated in battle alone. They had seen that. No, the key to stopping humanity was to undermine their greatest strength, their adaptability. The oracles had long observed that humanity's greatest gift and greatest curse was their ability to adapt to any challenge. The key, then, was not to outfight them, but to outsmart them. to keep them from ever reaching the stars they so desperately sought. In the darkest reaches of the galaxy, the oracles began to prepare. They gathered their allies and their knowledge, creating a plan that would shake humanity to its core. The strategy was one of subtlety, a war fought not with ships or weapons, but with ideas and influence. The oracles would strike at the heart of humanity's resolve, sowing discord and division among the once unified species. They would turn humanity's allies against them, and when the time came, they would ensure that the galaxy's response to humanity's dominance would be unified, decisive, and overwhelming. But the oracles were not the only ones who had noticed humanity's rise. An even older force, something far more primal, had begun to stir deep within the fabric of the universe. This force was not concerned with the politics of galactic empires or the rise and fall of civilizations. No, it was something far older and more dangerous. The universe had seen many species come and go, but none had ever come close to understanding the true nature of the cosmos. This force, known only as the Architects, had long watched from their place outside of time, observing the rise and fall of stars. The Architects were not interested in the petty squabbles of lesser species. They cared only for one thing, the balance of the universe. The Architects had long known that the fabric of the cosmos was delicate, and that the unchecked rise of one species, like humanity, could unravel everything. The Architects knew that humanity's reach must be curtailed. Their unchecked growth, their insatiable desire for conquest, could tear the universe apart. But unlike the oracles, the Architects had no intention of negotiating. They would not waste time trying to stop humanity with diplomacy or manipulation. The time for subtlety had passed. The Architects would act, and they would do so with force, as the oracles and the other galactic powers gathered, preparing for their final strike against humanity. A deeper, darker plot was already in motion. The Architects had begun to unravel the very fabric of space itself, pulling at the threads of the universe in a way that no one could yet understand. The very stars themselves were beginning to flicker and fade as the Architects prepared to intervene. The universe, it seemed, had its own plans for humanity, and these plans were not in alignment with the desires of any of the galactic powers. Humanity had made its mark on the galaxy. They had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. But now, they faced not just an opposition of other species, they faced the very forces of the universe itself. And the question remained, would humanity survive the consequences of their own ambition, or would they be swept away by the forces they had unknowingly awakened? Humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy had stirred the ancient forces. But it wasn't until the Architects made their presence known that the true scale of the impending threat became clear. The Architects were not merely observers, they were the keepers of the very structure of the universe, guardians of balance in the cosmos. Their reach extended beyond the bounds of space and time, and they had seen civilizations rise and fall before, but never had one species, one force, threaten to tear the universe apart as humanity had. The oracles, ancient beings who had long protected the fabric of galactic stability, had made their move in secret. They had begun to shape alliances, manipulate power structures, and sow the seeds of discord among the galaxy's most powerful factions. They knew that humanity's greatest strength was their ability to adapt, to innovate, to learn. They also knew that no matter how powerful humanity became, they were still a fragile species in the face of forces much larger than themselves. But the Architects were not concerned with strategy or diplomacy. They were concerned with the ultimate order of the universe itself. The balance of creation had been disturbed, and for that, humanity would pay the price. In the depths of the galaxy, at the very edge of known space, the Architects began their work. They had no need for armies or ships. Their power was far older, far deeper than that. Their influence was not felt through weapons or technology, but through the very fabric of space-time. They could twist the laws of reality, unravel the very structure of existence. And in doing so, they began to set their plans into motion. The first sign of the architect's intervention came when a star system, long believed to be stable, suddenly began to collapse in on itself. Entire planets vanished, torn apart by an unseen force that left no trace of their existence. The destruction was swift and brutal, the kind of thing that had once been unimaginable. No weapons, no fleets, no forces had caused the devastation, only a shift in the very laws of physics, as the galaxies surrounding the system experienced strange gravitational fluctuations and temporal anomalies. The oracles, ever watchful, finally revealed their presence to the galaxy's remaining powers. They sent emissaries to the major galactic councils, bearing cryptic warnings. The message was clear: the architects are awake, the universe itself is in danger. The galactic powers, still recovering from their failed attempts to stop humanity, were divided. The Shorians, with their psychic abilities, had felt the shift in reality. They knew that something far more dangerous than humanity was at work. The Karak, their warlike nature, stirred by the chaos, were eager to respond with force, but the fear of the architects kept them from acting rashly. The Valori, whose psionic powers had once been a source of immense strength, now felt their abilities flicker and wane as the cosmic balance shifted. They, too, understood the threat. Humanity, however, remained unaware of the greater threat looming over them. They were focused on their victory, on the conquest they had achieved, the alliances they had formed, and the power they had secured. The last battle against the coalition forces had shown them that they were still vulnerable, but they had emerged victorious, stronger than ever. Their fleets now stretched farther than before, their colonies growing and expanding across multiple star systems. Humanity had tasted the true power of the galaxy, and they would not stop until they had claimed it all. It was only when an emissary from the oracles arrived at the heart of humanity's expanding empire that they realized the full scale of what had been set into motion. The emissary, a figure cloaked in a shimmering aura of ancient energy, appeared in the council chambers of Earth's United Galactic Federation. The message they brought was both dire and cryptic. You have pushed too far, too fast. The architects will not allow this. Your survival is no longer guaranteed. The leaders of humanity, still basking in their recent victories, were caught off guard by the ominous warning. The oracles, who had long been nothing more than myth and legend, had now revealed themselves as the galaxy's true stewards, and their message could not be ignored. Yet, even as the emissary spoke, there was a subtle undercurrent of pride in the room. Humanity had achieved something no species had ever done before. They had defeated the Azor, crushed the Drakari, and shown the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with. But the emissary's words lingered in the minds of humanity's leaders. The architects have awoken. The warning from the oracles did not immediately change humanity's course, but it planted the seeds of doubt. It was not a tangible threat, not something that could be seen or fought against with weapons, and that made it all the more terrifying. The architects were not interested in human conquest. They were interested in balance, in maintaining the natural order of the universe. Humanity's unchecked expansion, their unrelenting push for dominance, had tipped the scales, and now the architects were moving to restore that balance. The first true sign of the architects' intervention came in the form of a cosmic storm. It appeared suddenly, out of nowhere, a rippling wave of energy that cascaded through space, distorting time and reality itself. Ships caught in the storm were torn apart, and entire fleets disappeared into the swirling chaos. The very fabric of space was warped, twisted by an unseen hand. The galactic core itself seemed to shudder, as if the universe was holding its breath. For humanity, the storm was both a warning and a wake-up call. They had spent too long pushing forward, convinced of their own invincibility, but the storm proved that the universe itself was fighting back. The galactic powers that had once feared humanity's rise now found themselves united in their dread of the architects. The oracles, who had long warned of the threat of unchecked power, had been right. Humanity had pushed too far, and the consequences were beyond anything they could have imagined. In the wake of the storm, humanity was forced to pause. Their fleets were decimated, their colonies thrown into disarray, and their leaders scrambled to understand the scale of the threat they now faced. The architects, with their mastery over the laws of the cosmos, had made it clear that humanity's dominance could not and would not be tolerated. But even as humanity began to regroup, there was a growing sense of fear. Not just fear of the architects, but fear of themselves. For the first time, humanity was confronted with the realization that they had overreached. The very ambition that had driven them to conquer the stars was now the thing that threatened to destroy them. The same drive that had fueled their victories was now being turned against them, as the architects began to unravel the very universe humanity had sought to dominate. The question that haunted humanity now was not whether they could defeat the architects, it was whether they could survive their own ambition. The balance of the galaxy, the very fabric of existence, was at risk, and humanity, for all their strength and ingenuity, was at the center of it all. The universe had always been a delicate equilibrium, and humanity, for all their power, had disturbed that balance. Now, they would face the full force of the consequences. But even as they stood on the brink of annihilation, there was one thing humanity had always done well: they adapted. And if there was one thing the architects had failed to account for, it was the indomitable will of humankind. Would humanity be consumed by the very forces they had awakened? Or would they find a way to survive in the face of a universe that no longer seemed to want them? Only time would tell.